The December wind cut through Chicago's Union Station like a blade, carrying with it the bitter promise of the worst blizzard the city had seen in decades. Steam rose from the locomotives in ghostly columns, mixing with the desperate breath of travelers stranded by canceled trains and impossible weather. In the midst of this chaos, a young woman in a threadbare coat stumbled through the crowd. Her medical bag clutched against her chest like a lifeline, unaware that her world was about to change forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass clock above the main concourse showed 11:47 p.m. when Rebecca Martinez felt her legs give out beneath her. She'd been standing in the ticket line for nearly 3 hours, having arrived from her 12-hour shift at St. Mary's Hospital, only to find that the last train to Denver had been canceled due to the approaching storm. The 26-year-old nurse had been surviving on coffee and determination for the past 18 hours, but her body had finally reached its limit. Rebecca hit the cold marble floor with a sound that should have been lost in the station's din, but somehow seemed to echo through the vast space. Her medical bag spilled open beside her, revealing the tools of her trade: a stethoscope, bandages, medication she'd purchased with her last paycheck for the clinic in Colorado, where she was desperately needed. The irony wasn't lost on her even in her semi-conscious state, a nurse collapsing with no one to help her. The other travelers stepped around her fallen form, too consumed with their own travel troubles to notice another person's distress. This was Chicago in 1924, a city where people minded their own business and kept moving, especially during emergencies. The few who did glance down assumed she was just another vagrant seeking shelter from the cold. Despite her clean uniform and professional appearance, it was then that she heard the voice that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. "Miss, can you hear me?" The voice was deep, cultured, carrying the subtle drawl of someone who'd spent time in the American Southwest, but had been educated in the East. Rebecca's eyes fluttered open to find herself looking up at a man who seemed to have stepped out of a magazine advertisement for expensive clothing. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair that caught the station's electric lights and concerned brown eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious. "I'm fine," she whispered, though they both knew it was a lie. She tried to sit up, but the man's strong hands gently pressed her back down. "You're clearly not fine," he said matter-of-factly. "When did you last eat?" The question caught Rebecca off guard. Most people would have asked if she was hurt or if they should call for help. The stranger was asking about her basic needs with the directness of someone accustomed to solving problems. Yesterday morning, I think." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "And sleep? Tuesday, maybe Wednesday." Rebecca's voice grew smaller as she realized how pathetic she sounded. "I've been working extra shifts to save money for." She stopped herself. There was no reason to burden this well-dressed stranger with her troubles. The man who had the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge was already reaching into his coat. He pulled out a silver flask and unscrewed the cap with practiced efficiency. "This is brandy. Take a small sip. It'll help with the shock." Rebecca started to protest that she was a nurse and knew perfectly well how to treat shock, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It wasn't condescending or patronizing. Instead, she saw genuine concern mixed with something else, a recognition that suggested he understood what it meant to be at the end of one's resources. The brandy burned going down, but it spread warmth through her chest and cleared her head enough to really look at her rescuer. His overcoat was cashmere, she realized, probably worth more than she made in 6 months. His leather gloves were hand-stitched, and the watch chain visible at his waist was unmistakably gold. Yet he was kneeling on the dirty station floor without a thought for his expensive clothes, treating her with a courtesy that most wealthy people reserve for their social equals. "What's your name?" he asked as he helped her into a sitting position against a marble column. Rebecca Martinez, she said, then added unnecessarily, I'm a nurse. Pleased to meet you, Miss Martinez. I'm William Carson. He paused, studying her face. And you're a long way from home. It wasn't a question. Rebecca found herself wondering how he could tell. Her accent had been carefully trained out of her during nursing school, and she'd learned to dress and carry herself in ways that helped her blend into the professional world. But somehow this William Carson had seen through all of that to recognize something essentially displaced about her. I'm trying to get to Colorado, she admitted. There's a mining town called Silver Ridge that needs medical help. The company. Doctor left last month, and they've been without proper health care since then. I've been saving money for months to make the trip. William's expression grew thoughtful. Silver Ridge, that's rough country, especially this time of year. What makes a Chicago nurse want to head into the Colorado mountains in the middle of winter? The question was asked with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, which made Rebecca's defenses lower slightly. Because they need help, she said simply. The mine owners won't pay for another doctor, and the workers' families can't afford to bring one in themselves. People are suffering unnecessarily. Something shifted in William's eyes as she spoke. The polite concern of a good Samaritan was replaced by something deeper respect, perhaps a recognition of a kindred spirit. That's remarkably noble of you. It's not noble, Rebecca replied, surprising herself with her honesty. It's personal. My father was a miner in New Mexico. I know what it's like when there's no medical care available. I know what happens to families when someone gets hurt or sick, and there's nobody who can help. William was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Around them, the station continued its chaotic dance of stranded travelers and overwhelmed railway employees, but in their small space against the marble column, a pocket of calm had formed. The trains won't be running until this storm passes, William said finally. That could be days. Do you have somewhere to stay? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. She'd spent her last money on the train ticket and medical supplies. Her plan had been to sleep in the station, if necessary, something that was becoming increasingly common as the economic uncertainties of the post-war years continued to affect working people. William stood up with fluid grace and extended his hand to help her to her feet. I have a suite at the Palmer House. There's more than enough room, and you need proper food and rest before you attempt any journey. The offer was so unexpected that Rebecca could only stare at him. In her 26 years, no one had ever shown her such spontaneous kindness, especially not a complete stranger. But it was the casual way he'd made the offer, as if providing shelter for stranded nurses was something he did regularly that convinced her of his sincerity. I can't accept that, she said automatically. I don't even know you. Then we'll remedy that over dinner, William replied with a smile that transformed his entire face. I promise you, Miss Martinez, my intentions are entirely honorable. You're a medical professional in need of assistance, and I'm someone with the means to provide it. It's really quite simple. As he spoke, Rebecca found herself studying his face more carefully. There were lines around his eyes that suggested someone who spent time outdoors, despite his obvious wealth. His hands, though well manicured, showed calluses that spoke of physical work. Most telling of all was the way he'd immediately assessed her condition and provided practical help without any apparent expectation of gratitude or reward. What do you do, Mr. Carson? She asked, accepting his help to stand. I raise cattle, he said, bending to gather the scattered contents of her medical bag with the same care he'd shown her. I own several ranches throughout Colorado and New Mexico. That's actually why I'm in Chicago business meetings with the meatpacking companies. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter weather. Ranchers, in her experience, were often the very people who exploited miners and their families. The mine owners who refused to provide medical care for Silver Ridge probably counted men like William Carson among their social circle. William must have sensed her change in mood because he paused in his gathering of her supplies. You're wondering. If I'm one of the villains in your story, he said perceptively. If I'm the kind of wealthy man who profits from others' suffering. His directness caught her off guard again. Are you? That's a fair question, William said, straightening with her repacked medical bag in his hands. And it deserves an honest answer. I employ over 300 people across my operations. They live in company housing that I maintain to standards higher than most city tenements. Their children attend schools I fund. When someone gets hurt or sick, they receive medical care at my expense, whether they can work again or not. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. I became wealthy by treating people fairly, not by exploiting them. But I understand why you'd be suspicious. There are plenty of men in my position who see workers as expendable. Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of deception or self-serving rationalization. What she saw instead was the quiet confidence of someone who had no need to lie about his principles. More importantly, she recognized something in his manner that reminded her of the few truly good doctors. She'd worked with a fundamental belief that those with power had an obligation to use it responsibly. Why are you helping me? She asked as they began walking toward the station's main entrance. Honestly? William paused, considering his answer carefully. I've spent the last 10 years building my business, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that money is only useful if it serves a purpose beyond accumulation. Meeting you tonight, seeing someone willing to sacrifice her own comfort to help people she's never met, it reminds me of why I wanted to become successful in the first place. As they stepped out into the howling Chicago wind, Rebecca realized that her failed journey to Colorado might have led to something far more significant than a new job. She was about to spend several days in the company of a man who challenged every assumption she'd made about wealth and privilege, and she had the unsettling feeling that her carefully planned life was about to take a direction she'd never imagined. The Palmer House Hotel loomed before them through the swirling snow, its warm lights promising shelter from more than just the winter storm. As William Carson guided her toward its welcoming entrance, Rebecca Martinez understood that sometimes the most important destinations were the ones you never intended to reach. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The Palmer House Hotel's dining room was a temple to Gilded Age opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables set with bone china and sterling silver. Rebecca had never been in such an establishment, and she felt acutely aware of her simple nurse's uniform among the evening gowns and tailored suits of Chicago's elite. But William Carson seemed oblivious to the disparity, guiding her to a corner table with the same natural courtesy he'd shown in the train station. I took the liberty of ordering while you freshened up, William said as Rebecca settled into the plush velvet chair. Roast beef, potatoes, and vegetables. Nothing fancy, but substantial. You need proper nutrition. Rebecca had spent 20 minutes in the hotel's powder room, marveling at the marble fixtures and trying to make herself presentable. Her reflection had shown a woman who looked older than her 26 years, with shadows under her dark eyes and skin pale from too many hours under hospital fluorescent lights. She'd pinned her black hair more securely and straightened her uniform, but there was no disguising the fact that she was exhausted, undernourished, and completely out of place. You didn't have to, she began, but William raised a hand to stop her. Miss Martinez, I suspect you've spent your entire adult life taking care of other people. Allow someone to take care of you for one evening. The waiter arrived with their first course, a rich soup that smelled like heaven to Rebecca's empty stomach. She tried to eat slowly, mindful of proper etiquette, but William noticed her restraint. When you're genuinely hungry, there's no shame in eating like you mean it, he said with gentle amusement. I've spent enough time around working people to know the difference between delicate appetite and actual need. Rebecca looked up from her soup, studying his face. You really aren't like other wealthy men I've encountered." "What other wealthy men have you encountered?" William asked, genuinely curious. "Hospital board members mostly. They visit the wards occasionally, usually with photographers from the newspapers. They shake hands with a few patients, make speeches about charity, and then retreat to their private clubs to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy." Rebecca's voice carried a bitter edge. "They see poverty as a moral failing and healthcare as a privilege rather than a right." William was quiet for a moment, processing her words. "Tell me about your work at St. Mary's." "It's a charity hospital," Rebecca explained, warming to a subject she was passionate about. "We serve the poorest neighborhoods in Chicago. Immigrants, factory workers, people who can't afford private medical care. The conditions are challenging. We're always understaffed, undersupplied, and overwhelmed. Yet you chose to work there rather than at a private hospital where the pay would be better." Rebecca paused with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "How do you know the pay would be better?" "Because I make it my business to understand how different industries operate," William replied matter-of-factly. "Healthcare, like everything else, follows economic principles. Private hospitals can afford to pay higher wages because they serve patients who can pay higher fees." The main course arrived, and Rebecca found herself eating with genuine appetite for the first time in weeks. The beef was perfectly prepared, the potatoes creamy, the vegetables fresh despite the winter season. It was the kind of meal she'd fantasized about during her long shifts at the hospital. "Why did you become a nurse?" William asked as they ate. "I wanted to be a doctor," Rebecca said, surprising herself with her honesty. "But my family couldn't afford medical school, and most schools wouldn't accept women anyway. Nursing was the closest I could get to actually practicing medicine." "Do you regret the choice?" Rebecca considered the question carefully. "No, but I regret the limitations. I've learned enough through experience to diagnose many conditions, to know when treatments aren't working, to see problems that the doctors miss because they're too busy or too arrogant to listen to the nurses. But I can't prescribe medications, can't perform surgery, can't make the decisions that could save lives." William leaned forward slightly, his attention completely focused on her words. "That must be incredibly frustrating." "It is," Rebecca admitted, "especially when you're working with doctors who see nursing as glorified housekeeping. They don't understand that we're the ones who spend the most time with patients, who notice subtle changes in condition, who often know more about what's actually happening than they do." "Is that why you're going to Silver Ridge?" "To practice medicine without those limitations?" Rebecca hesitated. She'd already revealed more to this stranger than she'd intended, but something about his manner encouraged honesty. "Partly. In a place that's desperate for medical care, they won't care that I'm just a nurse. If I can help people, they'll let me try things that would be forbidden in a city hospital." "And the other part?" "The other part is that I need to prove to myself that I can make a real difference. That all the education, all the sacrifice, all the years of watching people suffer because they can't afford proper care, that it was all for something meaningful." William nodded slowly. "I understand that feeling. The need to prove your worth through action rather than intention. Do you?" Rebecca asked, studying his face. "What could a millionaire rancher possibly need to prove?" "That I deserve what I have," William said quietly. "I inherited my first ranch from my uncle when I was 22. He'd built it from nothing, but I was handed success without having to earn it. Everything I've accomplished since then has been an attempt to prove I'm worthy of that initial gift." Rebecca felt her preconceptions shifting again. She'd assumed William was another entitled heir living off generational wealth, but his words suggested a more complex relationship with his. "Privilege. Tell me about your ranches," she said. William's face lit up with genuine enthusiasm. "I have 3 main operations. The largest is in Colorado, about 2 hours from Denver. It's primarily cattle, but we also raise horses. Then there's a smaller ranch in New Mexico that focuses on breeding stock, and a new property in Wyoming that I'm still developing. How many employees did you say you have? Just over 300 across all operations. About half are full-time, year-round workers. The others are seasonal. We bring in extra hands during roundup, branding, shipping seasons. Rebecca did quick mental calculations. That's a significant payroll. It is, William agreed. But it's also the foundation of everything I do. I learned early that you can't build a sustainable business by exploiting your workers. Happy, healthy employees are more productive, more loyal, and more likely to stay with you long term. It's actually more profitable to treat people well. That's unusually enlightened thinking. My uncle taught me that. He said the difference between a businessman and a robber baron was that a businessman understood the value of human dignity. William paused, his expression growing more serious. He also taught me that with great privilege comes great responsibility. I didn't ask to inherit wealth, but since I have it, I have an obligation to use it constructively. Rebecca found herself studying William's hands as he spoke. They were well cared for, but bore the calluses and small scars of someone who did physical work. She'd noticed this earlier, but was beginning to understand its significance. You work alongside your employees, she observed. Of course, William said, seeming surprised by the observation. How can you manage people properly if you don't understand what they do? I've worked every job on my ranches at some point. I can brand cattle, break horses, repair fences, deliver calves. My employees respect me because I respect their work. Enough to learn how to do it myself. The revelation painted a picture of William Carson that was completely at odds with Rebecca's expectations. Instead of the pampered aristocrat she'd initially assumed him to be, she was discovering a man who'd worked to earn his position despite inheriting it. What about your family? She asked. Do they share your philosophy? William's expression grew distant. My parents died in a carriage accident when I was 15. My uncle raised me until his death 7 years later. I have some distant cousins back east, but we don't maintain close relationships. They find my hands-on approach to business rather vulgar. And you've never married? The question slipped out before Rebecca could stop herself, and she felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. William noticed her discomfort and smiled gently. No, I've never married. I've been too focused on building the business to seriously court anyone. And honestly, most of the women in my social circle are more interested in my bank account than my character. That must be lonely, Rebecca said softly. It is, William admitted. Success without someone to share it with feels rather hollow after a while. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of dessert, a rich chocolate cake. That made Rebecca's eyes widen with appreciation. As they ate, William steered the conversation back to her experiences at St. Mary's Hospital, asking detailed questions about her daily routine, the challenges she faced, and the innovations she'd developed to work around resource limitations. You've essentially been practicing frontier medicine in an urban setting, he observed. Making do with limited supplies, handling emergencies without backup, treating conditions you weren't formally trained for. I never thought of it that way, Rebecca said. But you're right. We nurses at St. Mary's often joke that we could handle anything after working there. Then you're probably better prepared for Silver Ridge than you realize. As the evening progressed, Rebecca found herself relaxing in William's company in a way she rarely did with anyone. He listened intently to her stories, asked thoughtful questions, and treated her experiences with the respect usually reserved for more prestigious professions. More surprisingly, he seemed genuinely interested in her opinions about healthcare, policy, social reform, and the challenges facing working-class families. Why are you really interested in all this? Rebecca asked as they finished their meal. You could spend your evening with anyone in Chicago. Why are you here with it exhausted? Nurse talking about hospital administration? William was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Because in the last 3 hours, you've taught me more about what really matters than I've learned in years of business meetings and social functions. You're not trying to impress me or get something from me. You're just genuinely committed to helping people, and that's refreshing. He paused, meeting her eyes across the table. And because I have a feeling that our meeting tonight wasn't entirely coincidental. I was supposed to leave Chicago this morning, but my meetings ran late. I almost didn't go to the station tonight. I was planning to wait until tomorrow, but something made me change my mind. Rebecca felt something shift in her chest, a flutter of possibility she'd trained herself not to feel. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe there's a reason a Colorado rancher happened to be in a Chicago train station exactly when a nurse bound for Colorado needed help. As they sat in the warm light of the Palmer House dining room, snow swirling past the windows and the rest of Chicago battling the storm, Rebecca Martinez began to wonder if her carefully planned journey to Silver Ridge was about to take a detour. She'd never imagined possible. The storm raged for 3 days, trapping Chicago in a cocoon of white that shut down all rail traffic and most of the city. Rebecca found herself in the unprecedented position of being a guest in luxury while the world outside ground to a halt. William had secured her a separate room at the Palmer House, and their days fell into an unexpected rhythm that neither had planned, but both seemed to treasure. Each morning, they met for breakfast in the hotel's elegant dining room, where William would update her on the storm's progress through his network of business contacts. The railways were reporting unprecedented snow accumulation, with some lines buried under drifts 15 feet deep. No trains would be moving for at least another week, possibly longer. I should be frustrated, Rebecca confessed on their third morning together as she gazed out at the swirling snow. Every day I'm delayed is another day the people in Silver Ridge go without proper medical care. And yet, William prompted, sensing there was more to her statement. And yet I can't remember the last time I felt so rested. I've slept more in the past 3 nights than I did in the previous 3 weeks. Rebecca turned from the window to face him. Is that terrible of me? To find comfort in a situation that's probably causing suffering elsewhere. William set down his coffee cup and studied her face. It's human. You can't help people effectively if you're running on empty. Sometimes forced rest is exactly what we need, even if the circumstances aren't ideal. Their conversations had grown deeper each day, moving beyond polite getting-to-know-you exchanges into genuine discussions about their beliefs, ambitions, and fears. Rebecca had learned that William's business success was built on innovations in cattle breeding and ranch management that had revolutionized operations throughout the Southwest. More surprisingly, she discovered that he read voraciously, particularly books on social reform and economic theory. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, William said as they settled into their usual corner table. About your frustrations with the limitations placed on nurses. What about it? What if those limitations didn't exist? What if you could practice medicine the way you believe it should be practiced, with the resources and authority to make real decisions? Rebecca paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. That's a fantasy, William. The medical establishment will never accept women as equals. And even if they did, I lack the formal education to. What if the formal education wasn't necessary? William interrupted. What if experience and results mattered more than credentials? You're talking about frontier medicine again. I'm talking about a different kind of frontier medicine. William leaned forward, his eyes bright with an idea that was clearly forming as he spoke. What if instead of going to Silver Ridge to work in someone else's operation, you came to work in mine? Rebecca stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. Your ranch operation? Think about it, William said, his enthusiasm building. I have over 300 employees spread across remote locations, Accidents happen, injuries from cattle, horses, equipment. Illnesses spread through bunkhouses. Women giving birth with no medical assistance. Right now the nearest doctor to my main Colorado ranch is 40 miles away in Denver, and that's under good conditions. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you something better than a job. I'm offering you the chance to build a medical practice from the ground up with complete autonomy over patient care and treatment decisions. You'd have funding for supplies, equipment, whatever you need. More importantly, you'd have patients who would judge you by results, not credentials. Rebecca felt her heart racing. The offer was everything she'd dreamed of and nothing she'd dared hope for. "William, I can't accept charity." "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's business. Good medical care for my workers means healthier employees, fewer lost workdays, lower turnover. It's an investment that would pay for itself within a year. But more than that, it's the right thing to do." "Why?" Rebecca asked. "Why are you offering this to a woman you met 3 days ago?" William was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. "Because in 3 days, you've shown me more genuine dedication to helping people than I've encountered in years of business dealings. Because you have skills and knowledge that are being wasted in a system that doesn't value them properly, and because ... He trailed off, seeming to struggle with something. "Because what?" "Because I've been looking for a way to make my success mean something beyond profit margins and property values. Providing real health care to working families feels like exactly the kind of meaningful impact I've been searching for." Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of ulterior motives or hidden agendas. What she saw instead was the same earnest conviction that had first caught her attention in the train station. This wasn't a wealthy man's whim or a calculated business move. It was a genuine offer from someone who recognized a mutual opportunity to do good work. "Tell me exactly what you're proposing," she said carefully. William's face lit up with the kind of enthusiasm she'd previously seen only when he discussed his cattle breeding programs. The main ranch covers nearly 50,000 acres in the Colorado high country. Beautiful land mountains, meadows, clear streams. The main complex includes the big house, bunkhouses for the workers, barns, corrals, and various outbuildings. He paused to signal the waiter for more coffee before continuing. "I'd build you a proper medical clinic on the property. Not just a first aid station, but a real facility with examination rooms, space for minor surgery, even a few beds for patients who need overnight observation. You'd have a fully equipped pharmacy, the latest medical instruments, whatever you determine you need." "That would cost a fortune," Rebecca protested. "It's an investment in my people," William replied. "But beyond the immediate ranch workers, think about the broader impact. The nearest medical care for families in that region is hours away by wagon. A proper clinic could serve the entire area, neighboring ranches, mining operations, the small towns that have sprung up around them." Rebecca felt excitement building despite her attempts to remain practical. "What about legal issues?" "I'm not a licensed physician. In frontier territories, the law is more concerned with results than credentials. If you're helping people and not doing harm, local authorities tend to look the other way, especially if you have the backing of someone with influence in the community, which you have." "Which I have," William confirmed. "I sit on the boards of 3 banks, 2 mining companies, and the Territorial Medical Board. I can provide the legitimacy you'd need to practice without interference." The scope of the opportunity was staggering. Rebecca had dreamed of having the freedom to practice medicine according to her own judgment, but she'd never imagined having the resources to do it properly. "What would my living situation be?" "There's a house on the property that was built for the previous ranch manager. It's about a quarter mile from the main house, close enough for easy communication, far enough for privacy. 3 bedrooms, modern. Kitchen, indoor plumbing. You'd be comfortable. And my salary?" "What are you making at St. Mary's?" Rebecca told him, and William's eyebrows rose slightly. "I'd pay you 3 times that amount, plus room and board, plus funding for medical supplies and equipment. Your only expenses would be personal items and any travel you might want to do." The financial offer was beyond anything Rebecca had ever imagined. It would allow her to not only live comfortably, but to send money home to her family, something she'd never been able to do on a nurse's salary. "There's something else," William continued. "Something I haven't mentioned yet." "What?" "My ranch is only about 60 miles from Silver Ridge." Rebecca looked up sharply. "The mining town I was originally heading to." "The same. On your days off or during slow periods, you could still provide assistance there if you wanted. The difference is you'd have a secure base of operations, proper funding, and no pressure to make your services profitable." It was perfect. Too perfect. Rebecca had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true, especially offers from wealthy men who barely knew her. "What's the catch?" she asked directly. William smiled at her bluntness. "No catch. But there is one thing you should understand about what you'd be getting into, which is, ranch life is demanding, especially in Colorado. The winters are harsh, the work is physical, and you'd be dealing with a rough, largely male workforce that might not immediately accept a woman in a position of medical authority." "I've worked in Chicago emergency rooms," Rebecca said dryly. "I think I can handle cowboys. I'm sure you can. But there's something else. The kind of medicine you'd be practicing would be closer to battlefield conditions than hospital care. Traumatic injuries from livestock and machinery, emergency surgery with no backup, making life or death decisions with limited resources. It's exactly the kind of challenge you've been training for, but it's also dangerous and demanding." Rebecca considered this. Everything William was describing sounded like exactly what she'd been preparing for without realizing it. Her years at St. Mary's had indeed been like battlefield medicine, understaffed, under-resourced, requiring quick thinking and creative solutions. "When would you need an answer?" she asked. "The trains will be running again within a week. If you decide to come with me, we could travel to Colorado together. If you choose to continue to Silver Ridge, I'll make sure you get there safely and provide you with supplies and funding for your work there. You'd do that even if I turned down your offer? Of course. You're committed to helping people who need medical care. Whether you do it on my ranch or in Silver Ridge doesn't change the fact that it's important work that deserves support." Rebecca felt something shift in her understanding of William Carson. This wasn't just a business proposition or even a charitable gesture. It was an offer from someone who genuinely understood what she was trying to accomplish and wanted to help her succeed, regardless of what benefit it might bring him. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. It's a major decision that will affect the rest of your life. Take all the time you need." As they finished their breakfast and prepared to spend another day waiting for the storm to pass, Rebecca found herself studying William with new eyes. The man who had rescued her from the train station floor was offering her the chance to build the kind of medical practice she'd only dreamed of. More than that, he was offering her a partnership with someone who shared her commitment to using privilege and resources in service of people who needed help. The question wasn't whether the opportunity was appealing, it was everything she'd ever wanted. The question was whether she was brave enough to trust in something that seemed too good to be true, and whether she was ready to tie her future to a man she'd known for only 3 days but who seemed to understand her better than people she'd known for years. Outside their window, the storm showed no signs of abating, but inside the warm dining room of the Palmer house, Rebecca Martinez was beginning to realize that sometimes the most important journeys were the ones you never planned to take. The train that finally carried them out of Chicago bore little resemblance to the one Rebecca had originally planned to take. Instead of a cramped coach seat with her meager possessions, she found herself in William's private car, a rolling palace of mahogany paneling, plush velvet seating, and crystal decanters that caught the morning light streaming through oversized windows. Rebecca had made her decision on the fourth morning of the storm, watching William coordinate relief efforts for stranded travelers in the hotel lobby. He'd quietly arranged for food to be distributed to families who couldn't afford the Palmer House's prices, had paid for additional rooms for elderly travelers, and had even organized a makeshift clinic where Rebecca could treat passengers who'd fallen ill during the delay. His generosity was casual and constant, the behavior of someone for whom helping others had become second nature. "I accept your offer," she told him over breakfast, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the decision. William's face had lit up with genuine pleasure. "You won't regret it. We'll build something remarkable together." Now 3 days into their westward journey, Rebecca was beginning to understand the scope of what she'd committed to. William's private railroad car was equipped with a small office where he conducted business via telegraph, and she'd watched him manage 3 separate ranch operations, coordinate cattle shipments, and negotiate contracts with meatpacking companies, all while maintaining detailed correspondence with his foreman about everything from water rights to winter feed supplies. "You never stop working," Rebecca observed as William finished dictating another telegram to his secretary, a efficient young man named Thomas Fletcher, who'd joined them in Chicago. "Ranch operations don't pause for travel," William replied, settling into the seat across from her with a cup of coffee. "Cattle still need feeding, fences still need mending, and weather doesn't wait for convenient timing. The key to managing multiple properties is constant communication." Rebecca had spent much of the journey reading medical journals from William's surprisingly extensive library. He'd revealed that he subscribed to publications from medical schools across the country, part of his effort to stay informed about advances in healthcare that might benefit his workers. "This article about surgical techniques is fascinating," Rebecca said, looking up from the latest issue of the American Journal of Medicine. "Dr. Morrison at Johns Hopkins has developed a new procedure for treating compound fractures that could be revolutionary for ranch work." "Explain it to me," William said, leaning forward with genuine interest. As Rebecca described the surgical innovation, she found herself sketching diagrams on the back of an envelope, her enthusiasm for medical advancement overriding her usual reserve. William asked intelligent questions, clearly following the technical details despite his lack of formal medical training. "You could probably perform that procedure," he said thoughtfully when she finished. "The technique you're describing isn't dramatically different from what veterinarians do when treating horse injuries." "That's actually not a bad comparison," Rebecca agreed. "Frontier medicine often requires adapting techniques from veterinary practice. Animals can't describe their symptoms, so vets have to rely on observation and physical examination skills that are extremely relevant to human medicine. Have you ever considered studying veterinary medicine formally?" Rebecca laughed. "Women aren't admitted to veterinary schools any more than they're admitted to medical schools. Besides, I'm not interested in treating animals. I want to help people, but the skills would be complementary. Understanding animal anatomy and physiology would make you more effective at treating human injuries, especially the kinds of traumatic wounds you'll encounter on a ranch." The observation was typical of William's practical intelligence. He had a gift for seeing connections that others missed, for finding innovative solutions to complex problems. Rebecca was beginning to understand that his business success wasn't just due to inherited wealth. It was the result of genuinely superior strategic thinking. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a well-dressed man in his 50s who appeared in the doorway of their car with the confidence of someone accustomed to going wherever he pleased. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and expensive clothes that marked him as someone of considerable means. "William Carson," the man said with a broad smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I heard you were on this train. Mind if I join you?" William's expression remained polite, but Rebecca noticed a subtle tension in his posture. "Mr. Harrison," Of course, please sit down. Harrison settled into a chair and immediately turned his attention to Rebecca with the calculating interest of someone assessing valuable property. And who might this lovely lady be? Miss Rebecca Martinez, William said before Rebecca could respond. She's a medical professional who'll be establishing a clinic at my Colorado ranch. How fascinating, Harrison said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but. A lady doctor, how very progressive of you, William. Rebecca bristled at the condescending tone, but before she could respond, William's voice cut through the air with unmistakable warning. Miss Martinez is a highly trained nurse with extensive experience in emergency medicine. Her work will significantly improve healthcare access for working families throughout the region. Harrison raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense intended, I'm sure. It's just that one doesn't often encounter women in such ambitious positions. Perhaps that says more about the limits of your social circle than about women's capabilities, Rebecca said coolly. Harrison's eyes sharpened with interest, as if he'd found a more worthy opponent than he'd expected. Touché, Miss Martinez. I see William has found himself a spirited companion. The word companion carried implications that made Rebecca's cheeks flush with anger, but William intervened before she could respond. Mr. Harrison, what brings you to this part of the train? I understood you were traveling in the forward cars. Business, my friend. Always business. Harrison's attention shifted back to William with predatory focus. I've been hearing interesting things about your operations. Expansion plans, new territories, innovative approaches to worker management. My business activities are hardly secret. William replied evenly. No, but they are unusual. This philosophy of yours about treating workers as partners rather than employees, providing healthcare and education and comfortable housing. It's generating quite a bit of discussion among your fellow businessmen. Rebecca sensed undercurrents in the conversation that she didn't fully understand, but William's growing tension was unmistakable. What kind of discussion? Concern, primarily. You see, William, when one operation treats workers exceptionally, well, it creates expectations that other operations can't or won't meet. It's disruptive to established business practices. You mean it's disruptive to the practice of exploiting workers for maximum profit? Rebecca interjected. Harrison turned to her with a smile that was pure ice. Miss Martinez, I'm sure your medical training has given you valuable insights into human suffering, but business operations require a different kind of expertise. Actually, Rebecca replied, meeting his gaze steadily, my medical training has given me considerable expertise in the consequences of poor working conditions. Malnutrition, industrial accidents, preventable diseases, I've treated them all. The human cost of established business practices is written in the medical records of every charity hospital in America. How very idealistic, Harrison said dismissively. But idealism doesn't pay dividends to shareholders. Neither do dead workers, William said quietly, his voice carrying an edge that made Harrison pause. Of course not. But there's a balance to be struck between worker welfare and operational efficiency. Your approach, while admirable in its humanitarian goals, isn't sustainable on a larger scale. My approach is not only sustainable, it's more profitable long-term than the alternative, William replied. Healthy, educated, motivated workers are more productive than exploited ones. Lower turnover means lower training costs. Better working conditions mean fewer accidents and less downtime. It's not just morally superior, it's economically superior. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying William with new interest. You really believe that, don't you? I know it. I have 8 years of detailed financial records to prove it. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Harrison stood up with fluid grace. Well, I should return to my own car. Miss Martinez, it's been a pleasure meeting you. William, I'm sure we'll have opportunities to continue this conversation in the future. After Harrison left, the atmosphere in the car remained tense. Rebecca studied William's face, noting the way his jaw remained tight and his hand stayed clenched. "Who was that man?" she asked. "Marcus Harrison. He owns mining operations throughout Colorado and New Mexico. Also railroad interests, shipping companies, several banks. He seemed very interested in your business practices." "Too interested," William said grimly. "Harrison represents the old way of doing business, maximize short-term profits regardless of human cost. My success with different methods threatens that worldview." "How so?" "If I can prove that treating workers well is more profitable than exploiting them, it undermines the entire justification for the way men like Harrison operate. They can't claim they're forced to maintain terrible working conditions for economic reasons if I'm demonstrating that better conditions produce better results." Rebecca was beginning to understand the broader implications of what William was trying to accomplish. "You're not just running ranches differently. You're challenging an entire economic system." "I'm proving that capitalism doesn't have to be cruel to be effective," William corrected. "But that's a threatening message to people whose fortunes are built on cruelty." As the train continued westward through the changing landscape of the American heartland, Rebecca found herself contemplating the man she'd chosen to trust with her future. William Carson wasn't just offering her a job or even a partnership. He was inviting her to join a quiet revolution in how American business could operate. The medical clinic they would build together wasn't just about healthcare for ranch workers. It was a demonstration that investing in people's well-being was both morally right and economically sound. They would be proving that success didn't require sacrifice of conscience, that wealth could be built on foundation of dignity rather than exploitation. But as the train carried them toward Colorado and their uncertain future, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus Harrison's interest in William's operations represented more than idle curiosity. The look in the man's eyes suggested someone who saw challenge where William saw progress, threat where Rebecca saw hope. The stakes of their venture were becoming clearer with each mile westward. They weren't just building a medical practice and improving worker conditions. They were testing whether American capitalism could evolve beyond its most ruthless impulses. The success or failure of their experiment would ripple far beyond the boundaries of William's ranches, influencing how business was conducted throughout the developing West. As the Rocky Mountains appeared on the horizon, like purple promises against the setting sun, Rebecca Martinez realized that her journey to heal individual patients had become something much larger, an attempt to heal the very soul of American enterprise itself. The Colorado high country stretched before them like a painting conceived by divine imagination. As their hired wagon crested the final ridge before Carson Ranch, Rebecca felt her breath catch in her throat. The main valley spread out below them in a tapestry of emerald meadows bordered by aspen groves already touched with autumn gold. Snow-capped peaks rose on all sides like cathedral spires, and a crystal-clear stream meandered through the center of it all, catching the afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. "It's magnificent," Rebecca breathed, her medical bag forgotten in her lap as she absorbed the sheer scale and beauty of the landscape. "Wait until you see it in spring," William said, his voice carrying the pride of someone who'd fought to preserve something precious. "The wildflowers cover the meadows in colors you wouldn't believe possible, and the air you'll never breathe anything cleaner." The ranch headquarters came into view as they descended into the valley, a complex of buildings that managed to be both functional and beautiful. The main house was constructed of local stone and timber, with a wraparound porch that commanded views of the entire valley. Surrounding it were barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and various outbuildings, all designed with the same attention to both utility and aesthetics. But what struck Rebecca most forcefully was the activity. This wasn't the sleepy rural operation she'd expected, but a bustling enterprise where dozens of people moved with purposeful efficiency. Cowboys worked horses in the corrals while others repaired equipment or tended to cattle in nearby pastures. Women hung laundry and tended gardens near the bunkhouses, and children played in designated areas under watchful supervision. "How many people live here?" Rebecca asked as their wagon approached the main complex. "About 60 year-round," William replied. "Closer to 90 during peak seasons. Most of the married workers live in the family housing area, those cottages you see. Beyond the main barn, single workers stay in the bunkhouses." As their wagon pulled up to the main house, people began emerging from various buildings with the kind of eager anticipation that suggested William's return was a significant event. Rebecca noticed immediately that these weren't the sullen, dispirited workers she'd encountered at other industrial operations. Instead, she saw faces that were alert, healthy, and genuinely pleased to see their employer. "Welcome home, boss," called a weathered man in his 50s who appeared to be in charge of the welcoming committee. "How was Chicago?" "Productive, Jake," William replied as he climbed down from the wagon. "And cold, very cold." He turned to help Rebecca down, then addressed the growing crowd. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Miss Rebecca Martinez. She's a trained nurse from Chicago who'll be establishing a medical clinic here on the ranch." The announcement created a buzz of excited conversation. Rebecca found herself shaking hands with a steady stream of workers, their wives, and even some of their children. What impressed her most was the genuine warmth of their reception. These people weren't just being polite because their boss was watching. They seemed genuinely excited about having medical care available. "Ma'am, I can't tell you how welcome this news is," said a woman named Sarah Thompson, whose calloused hands and sun-weathered face spoke of years of hard work. "My youngest has been having breathing troubles, and the nearest doctor is such a long ride. I'll be happy to examine him once I'm settled," Rebecca assured her. "When did the breathing problems start?" As Sarah described her son's symptoms, Rebecca found herself automatically shifting into diagnostic mode, asking follow-up questions and making mental notes. Around her, other workers began sharing their own medical concerns or those of family members. A persistent cough, recurring. Back pain, a child's chronic stomach troubles. "Looks like you'll have patients before you even have a clinic," William observed with amusement as the crowd gradually dispersed to return to their work. Jake Hoffman, who Rebecca learned was the ranch foreman, lingered to discuss practical matters with William. He was a compact man with intelligent blue eyes and the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his authority through competence rather than politics. "We've had the Murphy place cleaned and ready for Miss Martinez," Jake reported. "Fresh paint, new furniture, everything she should need. Tommy Wilson's been asking about when we'd get proper medical care ever since he broke his leg last spring." "How is Tommy's leg?" Rebecca asked. "Healed crooked," Jake admitted. "Doc in Denver said it best he could, but Tommy was laid up here for weeks before we could get him to town. Walks with a limp now." Rebecca made another mental note. Improperly set fractures were exactly the kind of problem that could be prevented with immediate proper care. "I'd like to examine him as well." As William and Jake discussed ranch business, Rebecca took the opportunity to observe her new environment more carefully. The level of organization was impressive, everything had its place, equipment was well maintained, and safety seemed to be a genuine priority. The worker housing was clean and substantial, not the ramshackle structure she'd seen at other industrial operations. More telling were the small details that spoke of genuine care for employee welfare. Children played on well-built playground equipment. The workers' dining hall was as clean and well-appointed as many city restaurants. Even the bunkhouses had glass windows, proper heating, and space for personal belongings. "Miss Martinez," a voice called from behind her. Rebecca turned to see a young woman approaching with a toddler on her hip and concern written across her face. "I'm Elena Rodriguez. My husband Carlos works with the horses." "Nice to meet you, Elena. Is everything all right?" "It's my mother-in-law, Maria. She's been having terrible headaches for weeks now, and sometimes her vision gets blurry. We've been so worried, but the trip to Denver is so difficult for her." Rebecca's medical training immediately flagged this as potentially serious. Persistent headaches with vision problems could indicate several dangerous conditions that required prompt attention. "How old is Maria?" 62. "She's been healthy her whole life, but these headaches started suddenly about a month ago." "I'd like to examine her as soon as possible," Rebecca said. "Would she be comfortable with that?" Elena's face brightened with relief. "Oh yes, she's been hoping for this ever since Mr. Carson told us he was bringing a nurse. She's at our house. Now would you like to come see her?" Rebecca looked questioningly at William, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead. Jake and I need to review the winter preparations anyway." Elena's house was one of the family cottages, a neat 2-bedroom structure, with a small kitchen and sitting area. It was modestly furnished but comfortable, with the kind of personal touches that made it clear this was a home, not just temporary housing. Maria Rodriguez was a small, dignified woman whose weathered hands spoke of a lifetime of hard work. When Elena introduced Rebecca, Maria's face lit up with gratitude. "Doctora," Maria said in Spanish, then switched to accented English. "Thank you for coming to see me." "Please, call me Rebecca," she replied, sitting down beside the older woman. "Tell me about these headaches." As Maria described her symptoms, Rebecca conducted a careful examination using techniques she'd learned from the best doctors at St. Mary's Hospital. What she found was concerning elevated blood pressure, slight swelling in Maria's ankles, and reflexes that suggested potential neurological involvement. "Maria, I need to ask you some questions about your diet," Rebecca said. "Carefully. Do you eat a lot of salt? Preserved meats, pickled foods?" "See, we preserve much food for winter. Salt pork, pickled vegetables. Rebecca nodded, beginning to form a diagnosis. The symptoms were consistent with severe hypertension, possibly exacerbated by high sodium intake. It was a serious condition that could lead to stroke or heart failure if left untreated, but it was also very manageable with proper care. "I think I know what's causing your headaches," Rebecca said, taking Maria's hands in hers. "Your blood pressure is too high, which is making your heart work too hard. The good news is that we can treat this." "Treat?" Maria asked, hope creeping into her voice. "Yes, we'll need to change your diet, less salt, more fresh vegetables. I can give you medicine to help lower the pressure. And we'll need to monitor you regularly to make sure you're improving." Elena gasped with relief. "You can really help her?" "I can help her," Rebecca confirmed. "But Maria, this is serious. If we don't treat it, it could be very dangerous. You'll need to follow my instructions." "Exactly." As Rebecca explained the treatment plan, she found herself marveling at how different this felt from her work at St. Mary's Hospital. There, she would have had to defer to a doctor's diagnosis and treatment decisions, even when she disagreed with them. Here, she was free to use her full knowledge and experience to help patients directly. "I'll need to get some medications from Denver," Rebecca told Elena as they prepared to leave. "But in the meantime, we can start with dietary changes that will help immediately." When they returned to the main house, Rebecca found William reviewing ledgers with Jake in a spacious office that doubled as a library. He looked up as she entered, immediately reading the satisfaction in her expression. "Successful first consultation?" he asked. "Very successful. Maria Rodriguez has hypertension, high blood pressure. It's serious but very treatable. I'll need to order some medications, but we can start treatment immediately with dietary modifications." "Whatever you need," William said without hesitation. "Jake, make sure Miss Martinez has whatever resources she requires. Medical supplies, transportation to Denver, anything at all." Jake nodded approvingly. "Tommy Wilson's been asking when he could see you too, miss. His leg's been bothering him something fierce, especially when the weather changes." "I'll examine him tomorrow," Rebecca promised. "I'd like to see the space where you're planning to build the clinic first, though. I want to make sure we design it properly for the kinds of cases I'll be treating." William stood up, closing the ledger with evident satisfaction. "Let's go look at it now. I think you'll be pleased with what we have in mind." The proposed clinic site was perfect, close enough to the main complex for easy access, but positioned to provide privacy for patients. William had already had architectural plans drawn up for a substantial building with multiple examination rooms, a small surgery, a pharmacy area, and even living quarters for patients who might need extended care. "This is far more elaborate than I expected," Rebecca admitted as she studied the detailed blueprints. "It needs to serve the entire region," William explained. "Word will spread quickly that there's proper medical care available here. We'll have patients coming from neighboring ranches, mining operations, even small towns. The facility needs to handle significant volume." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Rebecca stood on the porch of what would soon be her new home and marveled at the turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she'd been an exhausted Chicago nurse with little hope of ever practicing medicine the way she believed it should be practiced. Now she was preparing to build a medical practice that could serve hundreds of people who desperately needed care. "Having second thoughts?" William asked, joining her on the porch. "Just the opposite," Rebecca replied. "I'm starting to understand the scope of what we can accomplish here. This isn't just about providing health care to your workers. We're going to change how medical care is delivered throughout this entire region." "That was always the plan," William said quietly. "I just needed the right partner to make it happen." As stars began appearing in the clear mountain sky, Rebecca Martinez understood that her journey from Chicago had led her to something far more significant than a new job. She was about to become a pioneer in a new model of healthcare delivery, proving that quality medical care could be both accessible and financially sustainable. The adventure was just beginning. 3 months after Rebecca's arrival at Carson Ranch, the partially completed medical clinic had already become the unofficial heart of the community. Even without finished walls or proper equipment, the building site served as a gathering place where workers brought their concerns, injuries, and questions to the woman they'd begun calling Doc Martinez with genuine affection. Rebecca had established a temporary treatment area in the ranch's old supply shed, equipped with basic medical supplies and a determination to prove that quality healthcare could thrive even in primitive conditions. Word of her skills had spread throughout the region faster than wildfire, bringing patients from as far as 50 miles away. On this particular morning, she was treating her most challenging case yet, a 12-year-old boy named Samuel Preston, whose arm had been crushed in a mining accident at an operation 20 miles north. The local mine foreman had brought the child through a blizzard, knowing that Rebecca represented the boy's only hope of keeping his arm. "Hold still, Samuel," Rebecca murmured as she carefully cleaned the wound that had become infected during the 3-day delay before his arrival. "I know it hurts, but I need to see exactly what we're dealing with." The boy's father, a weathered miner named Jonathan Preston, watched with barely contained anxiety as Rebecca examined his son's mangled limb. "The mine doctor said it would have to come off," he said quietly, "said there was no saving it." Mine doctors often say that because amputation is faster and easier than reconstruction. Rebecca replied without looking up from her work, "But faster and easier isn't always better." William appeared in the doorway of the makeshift clinic, carrying a cup of coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd learned not to interrupt Rebecca's work unless absolutely necessary. Over the past 3 months, he'd watched her transform from a capable nurse into something approaching a medical miracle worker, handling cases that would have challenged trained surgeons. "The infection is serious," Rebecca continued, probing gently around the wound, "but it hasn't reached the bone. The crushing damage looks worse than it actually is. Most of the important structures are intact." She looked up at Samuel's frightened face with the kind of reassuring smile that had already made her legendary among the ranch children. "Samuel, I'm going to save your arm. It's going to take time, and it's going to hurt sometimes during the healing, but you'll be able to use it normally when we're finished." The boy's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Really, Doc? You're not just saying that?" "I never just say things when it comes to medicine," Rebecca replied seriously. "Your arm is going to be fine, but you're going to have to be the bravest patient I've ever had, because this is going to take several weeks of treatment." As Rebecca began the delicate process of cleaning and debriding the wound, William found himself marveling once again at her combination of technical skill and natural compassion. She worked with the precision of a trained surgeon, but she also possessed an intuitive understanding of how to communicate with frightened patients that no medical school could teach. "Mr. Preston," William said quietly, drawing the worried father aside, "your son is going to stay here during his treatment. We have space in the clinic's temporary housing area, and there's no charge for any of this." Jonathan Preston's face crumpled with gratitude. "Mr. Carson, I don't know how to thank you. When the mind doctor said Samuel would lose his arm, my wife, she just broke down. That boy's our only child, and he's always dreamed of being a carpenter. Like his grandfather. He'll still be able to pursue that dream," William assured him. "Miss Martinez has saved limbs that other doctors had given up on. Your son is in the best possible hands." The mine foreman who had brought Samuel shifted uncomfortably in the corner of the shed. "Mr. Carson, I need to ask about the cost of all this treatment. The mine company didn't authorize ... The mine company isn't being asked to authorize anything," William interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made the foreman take a step back. "This child's medical care is being provided as a humanitarian service, not a business transaction. But sir, if word gets out that you're treating injured miners for free, every operation in the territory will start sending their casualties here instead of taking proper responsibility." "Good," William said firmly. "Maybe that will force those operations to improve their safety standards to prevent injuries in the first place." Rebecca looked up from her work, having overheard the conversation. "Mr. Harrison, isn't it?" she said to the foreman. "You work for Marcus Harrison's Northern Colorado Mining Consortium?" The foreman nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. Bill Henderson, shift supervisor at the Copper Creek operation." "And how many serious injuries have you had at Copper Creek this year?" Henderson shifted uncomfortably. "Well, mining's dangerous work, ma'am. Accidents happen." "How many?" Rebecca pressed, not pausing in her careful work on Samuel's arm. Double quotes, maybe ... 15 or 20 serious ones. Hard to keep exact count. 15 or 20 children and men who've been seriously injured because of inadequate safety measures," Rebecca said quietly. "And how many of those received proper medical care immediately after the injury?" "We do what we can, ma'am, but the nearest doctor is in Denver, 3 hours away under good conditions." "Which means most of those 15 or 20 people received minimal care during the critical first hours, when proper treatment could have prevented permanent disability." William watched the exchange with growing understanding. Rebecca wasn't just treating Samuel Preston, she was conducting an object lesson in the human cost of corporate negligence. "Mr. Henderson," William said, "when you return to Copper Creek, please give Mr. Harrison a message from me. Tell him that Carson Ranch will continue to provide emergency medical care to injured miners, regardless of their employer's policies. And tell him that I'll be happy to discuss with him how proper safety measures could prevent most of these injuries from occurring in the first place." Henderson nodded quickly and made his escape, clearly uncomfortable with the moral weight of the conversation. "That was deliberately provocative," Rebecca observed as she began bandaging Samuel's arm with expert precision. "It was deliberately honest," William corrected. "Harrison's operations have some of the worst safety records in the territory. He cuts costs by skimping on safety equipment and proper training. then refuses to pay for medical care when workers get hurt. And now he'll know that we're providing that medical care for free, which undermines his ability to use lack of health care as a way to control his workers. Exactly. As Rebecca finished treating Samuel and got him settled in the temporary patient quarters, William reflected on how their partnership had evolved beyond what either of them had originally envisioned. They weren't just providing medical care to ranch workers. They were demonstrating an entirely different model of how business could operate. When guided by genuine concern for human welfare. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch of Rebecca's house reviewing plans for the expanded clinic, William brought up something that had been on his mind for weeks. "We need to talk about the long-term sustainability of what we're doing," he said carefully. Rebecca looked up from the architectural drawings she'd been studying. "Are you having second thoughts about the financial commitment?" "Not at all. The clinic is already paying for itself through improved worker health and reduced lost time due to injuries. But I'm concerned about something else, which is, you're working 18-hour days, 7 days a week. You're treating patients from dozens of different operations throughout the region, conducting an informal medical school for the ranch workers who want to learn basic first aid, and still finding time to help design the new clinic building. That pace isn't sustainable." Rebecca set down her pencil and leaned back in her chair. "You're right. I've been running on adrenaline and determination, but that can't last forever. We need to bring in help. Other medical professionals who share our philosophy about accessible health care." "That's easier said than done," Rebecca replied. "Most doctors won't want to work in such an isolated location, and the ones who would might not be the kind of doctors we want. What about nurses? Experienced ones like yourself who are frustrated with the limitations of traditional hospital work?" Rebecca's eyes lit up with interest. "That's actually a brilliant idea. There are dozens of nurses in Chicago and other cities who have the skills to handle frontier medicine, but have never had the opportunity. If we could offer them the same kind of autonomy and resources you've given me, we could build a network of medical professionals throughout the region," William continued, warming to the idea. "Each ranch or mining operation could have a resident nurse with the training and equipment to handle most medical situations. Serious cases could be referred to the main clinic here. It would revolutionize healthcare delivery in the entire territory," Rebecca said, her excitement building. "And it would prove that quality medical care doesn't have to be concentrated in expensive urban hospitals." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Hoffman, who approached the porch with the urgent stride of someone carrying important news. "Boss, we've got a problem," Jake announced without preamble. "Tommy Wilson just rode in from the North Pasture. There's been an accident at the Henderson spread. Their barn collapsed during the storm today. Several men are trapped, and they're asking for Doc Martinez." Rebecca was already standing, her mind automatically shifting into emergency mode. "How many injured?" Tommy couldn't get close enough to tell for sure, but he counted at least 4 men who were pulled out unconscious. Could be more still trapped under the debris. "I'll need the emergency medical supplies and the wagon prepared for rough travel," Rebecca said, moving toward her house to gather additional equipment. "I'm coming with you," William announced. "William, it's dangerous. If the barn structure is unstable, then you'll need someone to help coordinate the rescue while you treat the injured. This is exactly the kind of situation where we work best as a team." As they prepared for the emergency journey through the mountain darkness, Rebecca realized that their partnership had evolved into something far deeper than a professional arrangement. They had become true collaborators in a mission that was larger than either of their individual ambitions. The ride to Henderson's ranch would test everything they'd built together: their medical capabilities, their crisis management skills, and their shared commitment to helping people regardless of the personal cost. But as their wagon disappeared into the Colorado night, carrying hope to families who had nowhere else to turn, Rebecca Martinez understood that she had found not just a career, but a calling that would define the rest of her life. The woman who had collapsed from exhaustion in a Chicago train station had become a pioneer in a new model of American healthcare, proving that dedication and resources could combine to bring quality medical care to the people who needed it most. The Henderson Ranch presented a scene of controlled chaos when William and Rebecca arrived in the pre-dawn darkness. The massive hay barn had collapsed under the weight of accumulated snow and ice, its heavy timber frame creating a deadly maze of debris that trapped at least 6 workers who had been securing equipment for the winter storm. Rebecca leaped from the wagon before it had fully stopped, her emergency medical kit in hand and her trained eye already assessing the situation. 4 injured men lay on blankets near the wreckage, attended by ranch wives who were doing their best with limited supplies and knowledge. In the uncertain light of lanterns and torches, she could see that at least 2 of the casualties were unconscious. "What's the situation?" She called to Ben Henderson, the ranch owner, who stood near the collapsed structure with blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. 6 men were inside when it came down, Henderson replied, his voice tight with stress. "We've pulled out 4. But Tommy Martinez and young Pete Collins are still trapped somewhere in the back section. We can hear Tommy calling for help, but we can't get to them safely." Rebecca's heart clenched at the mention of Tommy Martinez, Elena Rodriguez's brother, a 22-year-old cowboy who'd recently married and whose wife was expecting their first child. But she forced herself to focus on the immediate medical needs before her. "William, I need you to organize the rescue effort," she said, without looking away from the injured men. "I have to treat these 4 first, but we need to get to those trapped men as quickly as possible." "Already on it," William replied, moving toward a group of men who were standing uncertainly near the debris. His natural leadership qualities took over as he began coordinating a systematic approach to the rescue. Rebecca knelt beside the first casualty, a middle-aged ranch hand named Frank Sullivan, who was conscious but clearly in severe pain. A quick examination revealed what appeared to be several broken ribs and possible internal injuries from being struck by falling timber. "Frank, can you tell me where it hurts the most?" she asked while checking his pulse and breathing. "Chest and belly," Frank gasped. "Can't seem to catch my breath proper." Rebecca's hands moved with practiced efficiency, palpating his abdomen and listening to his breathing. The signs pointed to internal bleeding, a life-threatening condition that required immediate attention. In a fully equipped hospital, Frank would need surgery within hours. Here, in the middle of nowhere with only basic supplies, she would have to stabilize him and hope he could survive the journey to Denver. "Mrs. Henderson," Rebecca called to Ben's wife, who was hovering nearby with obvious anxiety. "I need you to help me position Frank to make his breathing easier. We're going to have to move him very carefully." As she worked to stabilize Frank, Rebecca kept one ear tuned to the sounds from the collapsed barn. She could hear William's voice directing the rescue effort with calm authority, organizing the workers into teams and ensuring they didn't take dangerous risks that would create more casualties. "We need to shore up this section before we can get deeper into the debris," William was saying. "Jake, take 3 men and get some of those support beams from the equipment shed. Tom, your team starts clearing from this angle, but nobody goes under anything that isn't properly braced." The second casualty was Pete Wilson, a young cowboy who'd suffered a severe leg fracture when a beam had pinned him against the barn wall. The bone was clearly broken, but Rebecca was relieved to see that it was a clean break without the complications of bone fragments or severe tissue damage. "Pete, I'm going to set your leg," she told him as she prepared splinting materials. "It's going to hurt, but once it's properly aligned, the pain will decrease significantly." "Doc, is it bad?" Pete asked through gritted teeth. "It's broken, but it's the kind of break that heals completely if it's treated properly," Rebecca assured him. "You'll be back to normal in a few months." As she worked, Rebecca found herself thinking about the contrast between this emergency and the medical crises she'd handled in Chicago hospitals. There, she would have been one small part of a large medical team, following protocols established by others and limited by bureaucratic constraints. Here, she was the sole medical authority, making life and death decisions with confidence. Born of experience and necessity, the third casualty required immediate attention for what appeared to be a concussion. The fourth was largely uninjured, but suffering from shock and exposure. Rebecca moved between them with efficient precision, stabilizing each patient and preparing them for transport if necessary. "Doc," William's voice carried across the wreckage. "Sight with urgent intensity. We've reached Tommy Martinez. He's conscious and talking, but his leg appears to be pinned under a major beam. We need you to assess whether we can move him safely." Rebecca looked up from her current patient, her mind racing through the medical implications. Moving someone with a possible spinal injury or severe fracture could cause permanent damage, but leaving him trapped could be equally dangerous if the structure shifted further. "Give me 2 minutes to finish here," she called back. Quickly completing her examination of the concussion patient, she made her way carefully through the debris field to where William's rescue team had created a narrow passage to reach Tommy Martinez. The young cowboy was wedged in a small space between fallen beams, conscious but obviously in severe pain. "Tommy, can you tell me exactly where you're hurt?" Rebecca asked as she squeezed through the opening to reach him. "My right leg, Doc. It's pinned under this beam, and I can't feel much below the knee," Tommy replied, his voice strained but steady. Rebecca's heart sank. Loss of sensation below the injury site could indicate nerve damage or compromised blood flow. Either condition could result in permanent disability or amputation if not addressed quickly. "Can you wiggle your toes on your right foot?" she asked while carefully examining what she could see of the trapped limb. I don't think so, Doc. I can't tell if they're moving." Rebecca's medical training told her this was a critical situation. The longer the leg remained compressed, the greater the risk of permanent damage. But attempting to move the beam without proper equipment could cause the remaining structure to collapse, potentially killing both Tommy and herself, William. She called back through the passage. "I need to know exactly how you plan to lift this beam. Tommy's leg is severely compromised, and we have very little time." "We've rigged a pulley system using ropes and that oak tree," William replied. "Jake thinks we can lift the beam about 6 inches, which should be enough to pull Tommy clear." "That's going to have to be enough," Rebecca decided. "But when you lift that beam, I need to be right here to guide Tommy's extraction. His leg may be badly damaged, and any wrong movement could make it worse." "Rebecca, it's too dangerous," William protested. "If the structure shifts when we lift the beam, then we'll deal with that when it happens," Rebecca interrupted. "Right. Now a young man's leg depends on precise medical management during his extraction. I'm not sending someone else to do work that requires medical expertise." As the rescue team prepared their improvised lifting system, Rebecca found herself thinking about the conversation she'd had with William just hours earlier about the sustainability of their operation. Here was a perfect example of why their work was so important in a conventional medical system. Tommy Martinez would have waited hours for a doctor to arrive, quite possibly losing his leg in the process. "Ready when you are, Doc," William called. From outside the debris field, Rebecca positioned herself as close to Tommy as possible, her hands ready to guide his movement the moment the beam was lifted. "Tommy, when we lift this beam, I need you to pull yourself backward toward me using your arms. Don't try to help with your legs at all. Let me handle that part." "I understand, Doc." "William, lift it now." The beam rose slowly as the pulley system took the weight, creating just enough space for Rebecca to reach Tommy's trapped leg. What she found confirmed her worst fears. The limb was severely crushed, with obvious fractures and tissue damage that would require immediate surgery to save. "Pull, Tommy." she commanded while supporting his injured leg as carefully as possible. The extraction took less than 30 seconds, but it felt like an eternity as Rebecca fought to prevent further damage to Tommy's mangled limb. When they finally had him clear of the debris, she could see the full extent of his injuries in the lantern light. "How bad is it, Doc?" Tommy asked, reading the concern in her expression. Rebecca met his eyes with the honesty that had become her trademark. "It's serious, Tommy. We need to get you to Denver immediately for surgery, but I think we can save your leg." As William's team prepared Tommy for transport, Ben Henderson approached Rebecca with obvious gratitude and something else, a proposition that would change everything. "Doc Martinez," he said quietly, "what happened here tonight, ... What you did for my men, ... I want to talk to you about something important." "What is it, Ben?" "I represent 7 ranch operations in this region. We've been talking about pooling our resources to bring in permanent medical care, but we've never been able to find the right person." He paused, glancing at the injured men she'd treated. "After seeing your work tonight, I think we've found her." Rebecca looked up from her patient notes, suddenly understanding that this crisis had become something much larger than a single emergency response. "What exactly are you proposing?" "A medical cooperative. 7 ranches, 2 mining operations, and 3 small towns contributing to fund a regional medical center with you as the chief medical officer. We're talking about a patient population of over 2,000 people, Doc, and the funding would be substantial enough to build a real hospital and bring in additional medical staff." William appeared at Rebecca's side, having overheard the conversation. "That's an interesting proposal, Ben. What kind of authority would Miss Martinez have over medical decisions?" "Complete authority," Henderson replied immediately. "We've all seen what happens when business owners try to make medical decisions. We want a medical professional in charge of medical matters." As they loaded the injured men into wagons for the journey to Denver, Rebecca found herself contemplating an offer that would transform her from a ranch nurse into the regional medical authority for thousands of people. It was everything she'd ever dreamed of achieving, and it had emerged from the worst crisis she'd faced since arriving in Colorado. But as she looked at William, who had coordinated the rescue with the same skill and dedication he brought to everything else, she realized that her answer would affect more than just her career. It would determine the future of their partnership and the feelings that had been growing between them for months. Crisis at Henderson's ranch had proven that their collaboration was more than just professionally effective. It was personally irreplaceable. Now they would have to decide whether they were ready to commit to something even larger and more ambitious than what they'd already built together. 6 months later, the regional medical center at Carson Ranch stood as a testament to what could be accomplished when vision met determination. The 2-story brick building housed 6 examination rooms, a fully equipped surgical suite, a pharmacy stocked with the latest medications, and patient wards that could accommodate 30 people. But more importantly, it represented a revolution in how healthcare was delivered across the American frontier. Rebecca stood in the center of the main treatment area, reviewing charts with Dr. Sarah Chun, a young physician from San Francisco, who had become the second doctor to join their growing medical cooperative. Around them, 3 nurses moved efficiently between patients, while a group of local women attended a training session on basic medical care. "The appendectomy you performed yesterday was textbook perfect," Dr. Chun observed, reviewing the surgical notes from a mining accident victim. "In most frontier locations, he would have died from peritonitis." "That's exactly why this center exists," Rebecca replied, checking the schedule for afternoon procedures. "Too many people have died from treatable conditions simply because proper medical care wasn't available when they needed it." The past 6 months had transformed Rebecca from a single nurse working out of a converted shed into the chief medical officer of the most advanced healthcare facility west of Denver. The cooperative that Ben Henderson had proposed after the barn collapse had grown into something far more ambitious, a Network of medical professionals serving an area covering nearly 10,000 square miles. Tommy Martinez appeared in the doorway, walking with only a slight limp from his barn accident injury. His leg had healed perfectly after Rebecca's quick intervention and subsequent surgery in Denver, and he'd become one of the medical center's most vocal advocates throughout the region. Behind him walked his wife, carrying their newborn daughter. "Doc Martinez, Maria wanted you to meet little Elena," Tommy said with the proud smile of a new father. "She's the first baby born at the center, and Maria says she's going to be a doctor, just like you when she grows up." Rebecca felt a familiar warmth at the sight of the healthy infant. The medical center had delivered 17 babies since opening, all with perfect outcomes thanks to proper prenatal care and sterile delivery conditions. In contrast, the mortality rates at mining camps and isolated ranches remained tragically. "Hi, she's beautiful, Tommy. How is Maria feeling?" "Strong as ever. She keeps saying that having a real doctor and proper medical care made all the difference. Says she wasn't scared for the first time in 3 pregnancies." As the Martinez family left, Dr. Chun shook her head in amazement. "I still can't believe what you've accomplished here in less than a year. When I was in medical school, our professors taught us that frontier medicine was necessarily primitive and ineffective. This center rivals anything I've seen in major cities. That's because we had the right backing," Rebecca said, her thoughts automatically turning to William. "Resources and vision are useless without someone who has the business acumen to make it all work." Speaking of William brought a familiar flutter to Rebecca's chest that she'd been trying to ignore for months. Their partnership had grown increasingly close as the medical center developed, but their relationship remained professionally focused despite the undercurrent of attraction that neither seemed willing to acknowledge directly. The sound of expensive boots on the medical center's polished floors announced an unwelcome visitor. Rebecca turned to see Marcus Harrison, striding into the facility with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to going wherever he pleased. He was impeccably dressed as always, but his expression carried a calculating coldness that immediately put Rebecca on guard. "Miss Martinez," Harrison said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "what an impressive facility you've built here. Quite the upgrade from that converted shed you started in." "Mr. Harrison," Rebecca replied coolly, "what brings you to our medical center?" "Curiosity primarily," Harrison said, his gaze sweeping over the facility with obvious assessment. "I wanted to see firsthand what all the talk has been about. Quite remarkable what unlimited funding can accomplish." Dr. Chun excused herself tactfully, sensing the tension in the conversation. Rebecca remained where she was, her posture straightening into the defensive stance she'd learned during her years dealing with difficult hospital administrators. "I understand you've been treating workers from my mining operations," Harrison continued, his tone deceptively casual. "I treat anyone who needs medical care," Rebecca replied. "That's what medical professionals do. How admirable. And I'm sure Mr. Carson appreciates having such a dedicated partner in his humanitarian efforts." The way Harrison emphasized the word partner carried implications that made Rebecca's cheeks flush with anger. "My professional relationship with Mr. Carson is exactly that, professional." "Of course," Harrison said smoothly. "Though I must say, the financial arrangement you've negotiated is quite generous. A fully funded medical facility, complete autonomy over operations, and I hear the salary is quite substantial." "My compensation is appropriate for the services I provide," Rebecca said firmly. "Indeed, which brings me to the reason for my visit." Harrison's expression grew more serious. "I'm prepared to offer you something significantly more attractive than your current arrangement." Rebecca stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "I'm offering you the position of Chief Medical Officer for all Harrison Industries operations throughout Colorado and New Mexico. 12 mining facilities, 6 ranching operations, and various other enterprises. We're talking about a patient Population of over 5,000 people, Miss Martinez. The salary would be triple what Carson is paying you, plus equity participation in the company's profits. The scope of the offer was staggering, but Rebecca's instincts immediately warned her that Harrison's generosity would come with significant strings attached. What would such a position entail? She asked carefully. You'd oversee medical operations at all facilities, establish treatment protocols, hire and train medical staff. Basically, you'd do for my entire organization what you've done here at Carson Ranch, but on a scale that would make you one of the most influential medical professionals in the Western Territories. And my authority over medical decisions? Harrison's smile became more predatory. Well, naturally there would be some coordination with operational management. Medical decisions that affect productivity or costs would need approval through proper channels. We can't have medical expenses spiraling out of control in the name of idealistic healthcare goals. You mean you'd want to overrule medical judgment when it conflicts with profit margins? I mean there would be appropriate oversight to ensure that medical expenses remain within reasonable bounds. Miss Martinez, you're a skilled medical professional, but you lack experience in the business realities of industrial operations. Rebecca felt a surge of disgust at Harrison's transparent attempt to control medical care for financial purposes. Mr. Harrison, I'm not interested in any position that would compromise my medical ethics or limit my ability to provide the best possible care to patients. That's rather idealistic, don't you think? In the real world, all medical decisions involve economic considerations. What you've accomplished here at Carson Ranch is impressive, but it's also financially unsustainable in the long term. What do you mean? Harrison moved closer, his voice taking on the confident tone of someone delivering unwelcome but necessary truth. I mean that operating a medical facility of this caliber costs far more than it generates in revenue. Carson may be wealthy, but he's not infinitely wealthy. Eventually, economic reality will force him to make difficult choices about his priorities. The implication was clear. Harrison was suggesting that William would eventually abandon the medical center when the costs became too burdensome. But Rebecca knew William well enough to recognize the absurdity of such a suggestion. Furthermore, Harrison continued, Carson's business model is creating unrealistic expectations throughout the territory. Other employers are being pressured to provide similar medical benefits, which is driving up labor costs across all industries. It's an unsustainable situation that will ultimately harm the regional economy. So you're opposed to workers having access to proper medical care? I'm opposed to business practices that ignore economic reality. What happens to all these workers when Carson's experiment fails and the medical center closes? They'll be worse off than before, because they'll have grown accustomed to benefits that can't be maintained. Rebecca realized that Harrison's offer wasn't just about hiring her. It was about dismantling the model that she and William had created. By removing her from Carson Ranch and placing her under his control, Harrison could simultaneously eliminate the medical center and prevent its model from spreading to other operations. Mr. Harrison, I appreciate your offer, but I'm perfectly satisfied with my current position. Think carefully about this, Miss Martinez. I'm offering you security, substantial compensation, and the opportunity to impact healthcare for thousands of people. What happens when Carson loses interest in playing doctor with his ranch hands? That's not going to happen, Rebecca said with complete confidence. How can you be so certain? Because William Carson doesn't abandon his commitments to people who depend on him. Harrison studied her face with shrewd intensity. Ah, I see. This isn't just about professional loyalty, is it? You've developed feelings for your employer. Rebecca felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger. My personal feelings are none of your concern. Actually, they're very much my concern if they're affecting your judgment about important career decisions. Harrison leaned closer, his voice dropping to a confidential tone. Miss Martinez, men like William Carson don't marry women like you. They marry within their social class, women who can advance their business interests and social standing. You're useful to him now, but don't mistake professional appreciation for personal commitment. The words hit Rebecca like physical blows, not because she believed them, but because they voiced the insecurities she'd been fighting for months. Could someone of William's wealth and social position seriously consider a future with a nurse? From a working-class background? Carson's interest in you is professional, nothing more, Harrison pressed. He sees you as a skilled employee who advances his business reputation. When he decides to marry, it will be to someone who can bring him social connections and political influence, not a working-class nurse who happened to collapse at the right train station. I think this conversation is over, Rebecca said firmly, though Harrison's words had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Think about my offer, Harrison said as he prepared to leave. When reality sets in, you'll realize that practical considerations must outweigh romantic fantasies. I'll give you 1 week to consider the proposition. After that, the opportunity will no longer be available. After Harrison left, Rebecca found herself shaken by the encounter in ways she hadn't expected. Not because she was tempted by his offer, but because his words had forced her to confront feelings she'd been avoiding for months. She was in love with William Carson. The realization should have been liberating, but instead it filled her with uncertainty. Harrison might be wrong about William's character, but he wasn't wrong about the social realities of their situation. William moved in circles where marriage was often as much about business alliances as personal affection. Could someone of his background seriously consider marrying a nurse from a working-class Mexican family? Her brooding was interrupted by the arrival of William himself, who appeared in the medical center with the urgent stride she'd learned to associate with important news. His face was flushed with excitement, and he carried a yellow telegraph message in his hand. "Rebecca, we need to talk," he said without preamble. "I have incredible news. If this is about Marcus Harrison's visit, I can explain. It's not about Harrison," William interrupted, though his expression darkened slightly. "Though I did see him leaving, and I can guess what he wanted. We'll discuss that later. This is about something much more important. Then what is it?" William waved the telegraph message with barely contained excitement. "I just received this from Washington. The Territorial Medical Board has formally recognized our center as the model for frontier healthcare delivery. They're recommending that Congress fund similar facilities throughout the Western Territories." Rebecca stared at him, struggling to process the magnitude of what he was telling her. "They want to replicate what we've built here, exactly. And they want you to oversee the entire program. You'd be appointed as the first director of Frontier Medical Services, with authority to establish medical centers throughout the Western Territories. Rebecca, we're talking about transforming healthcare for hundreds of thousands of people." The opportunity was beyond anything Rebecca had ever imagined, the chance to transform healthcare delivery across the entire American frontier. But it would also mean leaving Colorado, leaving the community they'd built, leaving William. "What did you tell them?" she asked quietly. "I told them I'd discuss it with my partner and get back to them." The word partner hung in the air between them, carrying implications that neither had been willing to address directly until now. "William," Rebecca began carefully, "I need to tell you something that I should have said months ago." "What is it?" Rebecca took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would change everything between them. "I'm in love with you." The words came out in a rush, before she could lose her courage or second-guess herself. William's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, pleasure, and something that looked like profound relief. "Thank God," he said quietly, setting down the telegraph message and moving toward her. "I've been in love with you for months, but I was afraid that admitting it would complicate our professional relationship." "It will complicate everything," Rebecca said, with a laugh that was half joy and half exasperation. "But I don't care anymore. Harrison made me realize that I'd rather have a complicated life with you than a simple life without you." William crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands in his. "Rebecca Martinez, will you marry me? Are you proposing to me in the middle of a medical facility?" "I'm proposing to you in the place we built together, surrounded by everything we've accomplished as partners," William corrected. "It seems like the perfect location to ask if you'll be my partner in everything else as well." Rebecca looked around at the medical center that had become the heart of their shared mission, at the evidence of what they could accomplish when their skills and vision combined. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Their engagement was announced the following week, creating celebration throughout the region, but also generating controversy that reached far beyond Colorado. The marriage of a millionaire rancher to a working-class nurse challenged social conventions and drew criticism from some quarters, but it also inspired countless people who saw in their union proof that American society was truly changing. Wedding took place 3 months later in the valley where Carson Ranch spread across the Colorado high country. The ceremony was attended by over 400 people whose lives had been touched by their medical work ranch families, miners, small-town residents, fellow medical professionals, and dignitaries from Washington who had come to see what they'd built together. Dr. Sarah Chun served as maid of honor, while Jake Hoffman stood as William's best man. Tommy Martinez, fully recovered from his injuries, provided music with a guitar that had belonged to his grandfather. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Maria Rodriguez, the elderly woman whose hypertension had been Rebecca's first successful case at the ranch, stood to offer a blessing in Spanish that brought tears to everyone's eyes. She says, Elena Rodriguez translated for the guests who didn't speak Spanish, "That love which grows from service to others is love that will last forever, and that 2 hearts united in purpose can heal more than medicine ever could." As Rebecca and William exchanged vows in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, with the medical center they'd built together visible in the distance, neither could have imagined that their chance meeting in a Chicago train station would lead to such a moment. The freezing nurse who had collapsed from exhaustion had found not just a career, but a calling and a love that would define the rest of her life. The millionaire rancher who had stopped to help a stranger had discovered that true wealth came not from what you accumulated, but from what you chose to give away. Together, they had proven that the greatest love stories weren't just about 2 people finding each other. They were about what those 2 people could accomplish when they dedicated their lives to something larger than themselves. The territorial medical network that emerged from their partnership eventually served over 50,000 people across 5 territories. Rebecca became the first woman to receive an honorary medical degree from Harvard University and was appointed as the first female Surgeon General of the United States. William revolutionized business practices throughout the American West, proving that ethical treatment of workers was not only morally superior, but economically advantageous. But their greatest achievement remained the proof that love which began in service and grew through partnership could indeed spark a story for the ages, one that would inspire generations of Americans to believe that the most powerful force in the world was 2 people working together to make the world a better place. Their love story had begun with a collapse in a train station and became a foundation strong enough to support the dreams of thousands of people who had never dared hope that someone might care enough to heal their pain and honor their dignity. In the end, it wasn't just a love story for the ages. It was a love story that helped create the age of modern American healthcare, built on the revolutionary idea that quality medical care should be available to everyone, regardless of their ability to pay or their position in society. And it all started when a millionaire rancher chose kindness over indifference, and a dedicated nurse chose trust over fear, proving that sometimes the most important journey is the one you never planned to take. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.